I don't live in a very, very Jewish world. What I see as my role at the CJN, in part, is having this bigger picture of how society at large sees Jews and being kind of prepared to understand it. So on October 16th, 2023, I wrote a column really just asking, where would a Jew not be considered a settler? This was at a moment where Jews were being accused not only of being settlers anywhere in Israel, not specifically in the West Bank, and also anywhere in North America, and basically just looking at this question of where on earth is there a consensus that Jews can live and that that's fine. Sometimes the answer isn't a place, but it is rather that there are people who think Jews should not live. My name is Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, and I'm the opinion editor at the Canadian Jewish News. To support this kind of work, make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
After the torture chambers, after being tortured, they were allowed to go to al-Masa prison. And for whatever reason, they were allowed to do beating. And one of them made me.
That's the voice of Judy Feld Carr in her Toronto apartment, showing me a beaded white keychain with her name on it and the word chai in Hebrew on the back. It was handmade for her by a Syrian Jew, Eli Swed, who was held, along with his brother Salim, in a notorious Damascus prison for 5 years on trumped-up charges of spying for Israel. They were set free in 1992, and that keychain is one of the only mementos which Feld Carr ever kept from her nearly 25 years devoted to rescuing over 3,000 Syrian Jews, by her count, which she started nearly 50 years ago in the late 1970s. Like many historic Jewish Middle Eastern communities, Syria's Jews faced extreme hardships that were worse after the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 and the ensuing Arab-Israeli wars. Their plight continued under the Assad family's totalitarian rule, first with the father, Hafez al-Assad, and continued for a while under his son, Bashar al-Assad, who was toppled just a month ago by Islamist rebels. Judy Feld Carr has been monitoring these new developments, all while mourning her husband, Donald Carr, a former community leader and president of the Canadian Jewish News. It wasn't until just before her husband passed away a few weeks ago that she finally felt it was safe to reveal to him the actual extent of her Syrian rescue operation. And now that the Assad dynasty has fallen, Feld Carr feels more free to talk publicly to us about the details of what she did.
You were sold like cows, like cattle, like a commodity. And I was buying. This was the hardest thing to do. What is your child worth?
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, January 6, 2025. Welcome back to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. After Syria's murderous Assad regime fell a month ago, I immediately wondered what Judy Feld Carr thought about all the news. She's 86 now. She's been decorated by the Canadian government and by the Israeli government for her achievements as a modern-day Oskar Schindler or even Raoul Wallenberg, except, unlike them, she was a Jew rescuing her own people. Back in the 70s, when she and her first husband, Dr. Ronald Feld, decided to help publicize the plight of Syrian Jews who were cut off from the outside world, living under a police state where Jews couldn't go to school beyond grade 6, their synagogue in Aleppo had been burned, they couldn't travel more than 5 kilometers without a minder from the Secret Service, and anyone who was caught trying to escape to Israel was tortured and imprisoned, Carr says she found very little sympathy for her cause from the Canadian government, and not much more support from the organized Jewish community either. But one day, she made a cold call to Syria, asking the long-distance operator to put her in touch with somebody Jewish there. And it worked. She started simply by mailing religious books and items to a Syrian rabbi. The pair used phrases from the Psalms to write to each other in code, and that paved the way to her ransoming individual Jews and smuggling them out. A few grateful Syrian Jews have named their children Judy after her. She joins me now.
My deepest condolences. I know you spoke to our colleague, Heather Rengel, for the obituary that they ran, which was a profile, beautiful profile.
Don was president for 20 years.
You
Should I
know.
not? I turned down to a newspaper and the TV. I will not go on anymore. I'm not looking for more. I had enough trouble over the years with threats. I don't want another. What I was doing was not fun and games.
You mentioned threats from then. Are you still at all under protection now?
No, I don't have protection, but I certainly did have protection for a very long time. Protection in front of my house, and I had protection when I went to give speeches. When I went to another country, I used to have protection in front of the door of my hotel room. These were not idle threats. These were major physical. They wanted me dead.
Would you be able, if it's a Canadian RCMP, Mossad, private, a combination?
I would say mostly the Mossad. I didn't have Canadian protection because the Canadians had no idea what I was doing.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to bring us up to the modern day news. Of course, you've been sitting Shiva for your husband and watching what your grandchildren are doing in Israel and being nervous. Have you had any chance to follow the news about the overthrow of the Assad regime at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And the stupidity of that was done on the BBC.
I don't know who it was, but it was a reporter standing. Is this the same one we're talking about? Standing in the square in Damascus, right? And saying how the Christians and the Jews and everyone here are celebrating. Is that the one you're thinking of it?
One.
When you saw that, what went through your mind?
I laughed. I've never heard stupidity like that in my life. What Jews? What Jews? There are maybe 2, maybe 3 left in Damascus. Aleppo has no Jews. That is for sure. Kamishli has no Jews. Those are the 3 cities where Jews could live.
If we look at the videos coming out of Syria, a lot of attention has been paid to the state, the conditions of these torture prisons that people are seeing for the first time in decades. When you see these things, what does it make you think of from your work, and why did it make you put prisons as your priority, prisoners as your priority?
Because Jews were being arrested for trying to escape. Not mine. I didn't lose one. But some people tried to do it on their own. Some people did it with organizations, and they were caught. And I've seen what they did to the prisoners. One of the women was 9 months pregnant, and she gave birth to a baby on the stone floor in Aleppo in a prison. No milk, nothing, let the baby die. I got milk into the prison. I got cans of Nestle milk into the prison. I kept that baby alive for the first 3 months of her life. I have a picture of her. The people that I got out of prison, you mentioned the Swed brothers. The hell that they went through in those 5 years is indescribable. But they weren't the only one. There was the Jack Lalo. There was the La Cambra son and father. There were a group of them. There were young kids who tried to escape. One of them, the last I saw of them, which was some years ago, because I don't keep in touch with anybody I get out of prison, with the exception of one man who was in prison 3 times and his wife was shot. They used this torture called balakot, which are thin pieces of leather, like it become like wire, and they smash the bottom of the feet until the bones are showing. All the flesh comes out, and they cannot walk anymore. And after I brought these young men out, a lot of treatment, plastic surgery. They have to walk on sponges, soft sponges, in specially made sandals, because you can't touch the bottom of their feet. what was most interesting is I was the only one they ever trusted. They would talk to me. I would sit with them. And really, this wasn't my style. I stay away from people I took out. But every one of the prisoners I saw. And you see the pictures of what happened in the Syrian prisons today. That's how they live. They happen to be Jews in those prisons.
Our
And
listeners may not know that the Syrians put out special treatment for Jews because they treated them as hostages and the worst enemies of all the Syrian regime because of Israel, right?
they say they kept them as hostages so that they wouldn't go to fight for Israel. And the first man I got out of Syria in 1977, and I brought him to Toronto. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. The doctor who saw him here, who was a survivor of Auschwitz, said, I have not seen a body like that since Auschwitz. He was so beaten. He was so destroyed physically and mentally. He was a rabbi. He was the rabbi of Aleppo.
Do you know his
Yeah.
name? Can we know his name?
His name was Eliyahu Dahab. So when he got into Toronto, into the Mount Sinai, because I had arranged for the Mount Sinai to take him, and I arranged actually through a government official in Ottawa to give him a minister's permit. The only time I ever managed to get one. He was there for 3 weeks, and the doctors knew he wouldn't live because of the cancer. He wanted to go to Israel and see his mother, who was 97 years old, and he hadn't seen her since 1948. And I sent him to Israel. When he got to Israel, his mother had Alzheimer's, and she didn't know him. Dawn and I came to Israel, and I met him the day before he died. And he said, I have another thing to ask you. Mrs. Judy, I have one more thing. Will you take out my oldest daughter? And to be very blunt, I don't know how. I don't know how. He was ransomed. He was a fluke. And I said to my husband as we were going down the stairs from his daughter's apartment in Poland, I lied to him. I told him I would get her, and I don't know how to do it. It took me 1.5 years, and I bought her.
My name is Rivka Campbell, and I am the host of the CJN podcast, Rivkush. My podcast, it's a focus on Jews of color, talking about anything. It's really important for mainstream Jews to see that I am just as Jewish as you. The topics that interest you also interest me. I want to talk about Israel. You want to talk about Israel. I want to talk about food. Maybe it's not the food you want to talk about, but I want to talk about food. It's important that the person talking about Judaism, Israel, whatever, has a face like mine. It really, hopefully, changes the perception of Jews of color. To support my podcast and the rest of the CJN, please make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
And then that was the beginning of seeing, wait, there's ways, but she was a straight ransom. She was not an escape.
Can you tell us how much a person cost to ransom on average?
It all depended. I want to go back one step with you. I never made an initiative to get anybody out of Syria. They had to find me. I was their last resort out of the country. They would try every way they could get out. And to find me was very, very difficult. First of all, they didn't know my last name, didn't know where I was living. They knew I was in Canada someplace, and they had to tell me what they wanted through interpreters, through liaisons.
You never learned to speak Arabic, right?
No, money goes on fingers. I don't have to say anything. And I had set up an underground by this time inside Syria, so I could get information pretty quickly. When they finally found me, it would take me a great deal of time. If it was a situation where they could not go on the escape, it had to be a ransom. And this is what is the most disgusting part of this whole thing. What is your child worth? You've come to me and you've got 4 children. Maybe I can get 2. I'll give you an example. I got a father and mother and 1 child out. I bought them for a price. I paid less for the kid because he had cancer. Had he have been healthy, I would have paid double.
What are we talking about? How much was that one?
Prices were negotiated. If a girl, this is awful, if somebody was ugly, lost her teeth, didn't look very beautiful, I could sometimes make a deal for $1,000. A very attractive girl whose family had come to me, I'd sometimes go up to $5,000 US cash. What would you pay to have your child free? Well, that's what I had to do. I had to say, I'm sorry, I can't get your child now. I will keep trying, because I was negotiating.
And the money came from?
All the money came from a fund that was set up in the Bethsedic in 1973 in memory of my late husband, the Dr. Ronald Feld Fund for Jews in Arab Lands. It was to send religious books to Syria, which is what we started doing. And the fact that the rabbi in Damascus got the books, mind you, it was also stuck with money in the book, inside the box. Whatever the rabbi would send me by telegram. Remember what telegrams were? By telegram, what he needed. And I would answer him back. And the telegrams were coded. So I found a lot of information out by codes in my address. I never dreamt at the time that I would be ever even knowing how to take out a person. So the money to send these books cost a lot of money. To buy them, to tear out the covers, to tear out the front pages, anything dealing with Israel, except prayers, that was fine, but covers of the printers, I cut them to pieces. Taliesim had to be made to order. Tefillin had to be made to order.
Without certain things of Israel on it, or what have you?
Nothing on the collar. You couldn't have a symbol of Israel. You couldn't have a Magen David. You couldn't have a menorah. You couldn't have anything. And then ship them to Syria. That cost a lot of money. Money was coming into that fund constantly. And the word traveled. It went right across Canada. Money was coming in from Halifax to Vancouver.
The total amount would be how much do you think, all told? Was
I know exactly how much, but I won't say.
Why don't you want to say?
I don't want to say because it isn't really anybody's business. I was passing borders and I was running escapes and I was paying smugglers. And this was not what you would call as a kasher situation of resettling and getting a home to live in. I didn't do that. That was the Safnut. That was organizations in the States when they came in.
Were there others besides your friend, the first rabbi who came to Toronto, that eventually came and stayed or came through, or he was the only one?
I didn't bring them to Canada. I couldn't get them into the country.
Was this a none is too many situation again, that they didn't want to get involved, the Canadian government?
So what I was doing was living two separate lives in a sense. My kosher life was going to the government on behalf of the Canadian Jewish community saying, please, will you let them into this country on human rights issues? And the word always was, we are monitoring the situation closely. And by the way, I met with the ministers of foreign affairs. I met with the ministers of immigration. The only time I got two young women into Canada was through Ron Atke when he was Minister of Immigration. Every single minister turned me down. And I got these two girls here. They're no longer here. They're married. And I got them new clothes and got them looking like they would go to Israel, and they did. But I wanted a week here. I wanted 2 weeks in the country. I couldn't get them in for a week. They said, oh no, we've heard from the American embassy that things are pretty good in Syria, that they don't have a problem. How do you know they don't have a problem? I'm dealing in the prisons. I'm dealing with people I'm separating parents from children. As I mentioned before, the child with the cancer and his parents, there were 2 children left behind. Do you know what that was like, not to see your children for all these years?
What happened to those two?
How I had to do this. I used to cry myself to bed at night. I'm a mommy. How am I doing this? But one Sunday afternoon, I called her up and they said, what are you doing this afternoon? And as soon as she hears my voice, oh, she's screaming and crying. I said, look, there's a present for you at Kennedy Airport for the baby. She gets to the airport, the 2 kids are there. They're both married. She's a grandmother now. They're there. And that's what happened. The other thing is, how do you make a decision on an escape route when you've got little kids to go? They had to have their mouths taped. They could go with one diaper. Those were my rules. 1 pair of socks. This was so terrible, and I had nobody to talk to. How do I live with myself if they're caught? And what if the baby cries on the way? Should I take that family with the baby? And I had to be sometimes so cruel. And there were times when arrangements were made and a father gets on the plane with 4 children. And the plane is taxiing out of the airport in Damascus. And the mukhabarat comes on the plane and says, there's a Jew on this plane. And the mukhabarat agent comes on and says to me, you've got 10 minutes, choose 2 to stay. What in the world does a parent do? This is, again, a Sophie's Choice.
Right, that's a book and a movie that people may not know of a certain age, but it was a movie about on the Holocaust, and a mother had to make a choice. When they talk about these things that are happening after the overthrow of the Assad regime, some of the other tapes that came out, maybe you saw this one, was about the artifact that supposedly was found underneath in the compound in the mansion, right? This ancient Torah scroll that was 500 years old that was found in Assad's mansion. Were you aware of that too?
I saw that too.
Yeah, it's been debunked since that tape came out. They said it's actually not from Syria. It's an old tape from somewhere else. But we should talk about this. Besides talking about the people that you saved, there was a very important story our listeners may not know about, which is the artifacts, the Damascus heter, that you personally had a hand in rescuing. The one that came out in a plastic bag that's now in Israel.
That I took it.
Maybe you can describe how you heard about this book.
My husband and I were invited in Jerusalem to the Israel Museum for lunch. And the curator of the Middle East department showed us the restoration on the last page of the Aleppo Keter, which was done by Maimonides, they believe, and half of it is missing. Nobody has ever seen it. Nobody has found it. And then she said to me, we hear there's a Damascus Keter. And I asked her where it is. And she said, I don't know, but no one has seen it for 500 years. And as we're going home, I say to my husband, Don, wouldn't it be something if I found it? And he made a statement that everybody has a normal life, you're nuts. So that afternoon, I called up the second in command of the Mossad at home, who yelled at me, what are you calling me for? And I said, did you ever hear of a Damascus Keter? And his answer to me was, Judy, did you take everybody out of Aleppo already? Stop worrying about the Keter. I knew it was there by that statement. Now, that was in July. I brought it into the Israeli ambassador in Ottawa, Yitzhak Shelef, with a black shopping bag. I had worked out who was going to get it and how it was going to be taken out of the shul. And that's a story that you need an hour for me to tell you. I brought it into Yitzhak Shelef, and he opened it up and started crying. The back of the book has two bills of sale, one in Rashi script and the other in Judeo-Arabic script. But it's in perfect condition, except on the front page of Bereshit, there's a little stain. The book was written in Italy. From Italy, the book was taken to Spain during the Inquisition. The King of Spain, before Queen Isabella, had the book and gave it to let the Jewish community hold it, whatever. It was kept in a shul, and it was sold. And the book is taken to Constantinople with the owner of the book from the Inquisition. It is now sold in Constantinople. The book now leaves Constantinople and with Jews from the Inquisition, and they build their own shul in Damascus because they're the new ones. And they don't blend in with the Damascus Jews who've been there for thousands of years. And they keep it in the basement for over 500 years. But the book we know, has been written in 1180 because that's been now checked by the National Library where it is now. And because it's not mine to keep.
We now know that they were looting years ago the synagogues and not that Torah scroll, but I'm sure Assad took a lot of other stuff. Where are the books and things and taluses that you gave to the community?
I honestly don't know where they were, but inside every book in French, there's a note that says, best wishes to the Jewish community of Aleppo, Syria, from the Jewish community of Toronto, Canada. And it's going to be interesting if they find them. But to me, the most important thing was to get out the Keter, because the Keter was on the inventory of the Syrian government. They were going to build a museum in Damascus of Jewish artifacts. That was the next thing that Assad was building, Hafez Assad. And then that was going to be the Damascus Keter. Well, then the Damascus Keter, disappeared. But the Keter was in my cedar closet. So, It's no longer in my cedar closet. It's
Some
in
people
the
don't know what
library.
a cedar closet is. We had one too. This is so amazing that you are sharing these stories with us as we're watching in real time what's
It's
happening
my
now.
pleasure.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Judy Feld Carr has kept all her handwritten files from the Syrian rescue, although Professor Harold Troper wrote a book about her, but she didn't give him access to everything she had. Now she hopes to donate her papers one day to an archive, so researchers will be able to tell the complete story of the role she and Canada's Jewish community played in one of the most unusual and unlikely rescue operations in modern Jewish history. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Avi Feingold. I'm the co-host of Bonjour Chai on the CJN Podcast Network and a contributing editor for the CJN magazine. Bonjour Chai is Canada's weekly Jewish discussion and debate podcast. We discuss the issues that are important to Jewish Canadians. The stereotype of Canadians is that we either all agree with each other or we disagree and we don't want to talk about it and we don't fight and we don't argue. We do our thing quietly and off to the side. And it's not always true. I like to think that Canadian Jews have strong disagreements, but that are respectful about it. I think historically that has been the case. And hearing two people disagree in a loving, friendly, idea-based sort of way, hopefully is a model for other people to have these conversations themselves. And I think it's important for people to be able to hear these things. We can't do this without your support. Your donation goes a long way to helping us bring you the stories that you want to hear. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you can even get a tax receipt.